as much editing later. Hey, welcome to today's live interview. We are super excited because we are going to be joined by Amy Chandler, who is the founder and so many things of My Story Matters. And it is a nonprofit organization that we're going to learn all about today. But in this month where we've been talking all about interviewing and just learning all of the tips and tricks, Amy is going to just help us take our interviews to the next level and really take a minute to consider the difficult interviews that might be in our families and even in our neighborhoods, just the people that we want to interview that maybe might be a little bit more difficult. We're going to explore some of that with her. So let us know where you're joining us from in the comments. We will read from there, but we also want to hear what questions you have for Amy. So make sure you're using the comment box and invite your friends and family right now so that you can come and we can all learn so much from her together. So without further ado, welcome Amy. How are you?
Hello, it's good to be here.
Yay, we're so excited. Thank you for taking the time. We are so excited to just learn from all your experience and just all the many things that you have been doing. So I'm going to start you off right away with just give me a little background, like what got you into this world of stories and interviewing, and like tell us a little bit about that journey. I'm sure it's a long journey, but tell us, the version that we can get into here.
Sure. So people always ask, like, where did you get this idea, right? And I think really the birthplace was back in my childhood. I have this little seed that was planted that has like grown over time, right? But I was 12 years old, and in my church youth group, one of the things that they asked us to do was to fill out a 4-generation pedigree chart. Okay. And I was like, okay, my mom's got one of those. I photocopied it and I took it. And my youth leader said to me, no, I didn't ask you to copy it. I asked you to write it and fill it out. And in my little teenage attitude, I was like, it's the same thing, right? I was so annoyed. But I did it. And I'm filling it out like with my little ornery attitude, right? My teenage self. And I started writing that 4th generation. I started to write those names out, and I got to my great-great-grandmother. Mm-hmm. And I knew her. She didn't pass away till she was 107. She was a part of my life at that time. And when I wrote her name, it like hit me. All of these names on here were people. Everyone has a story. And it gave me the little like genealogy bug. It just really did. And I dove in and I just started to like research and find stories everywhere I could go. And so that was always kind of a piece of my teenage journey. My college journey was pulling together those stories. And then shortly after my kids were born, I started making them books about this family stories and reading them stories about grandpa and things. And they loved them. And one day I had the thought, there are so many kids that don't have that. Yeah. So many kids whose family stories won't be shared, and will their story be shared? It was just kind of this like nagging in the back. And one day I really felt inspired that I should start a nonprofit foundation, and the inspiration came to call it My Story Matters. And that we would just spend our time in those marginalized populations where maybe nobody else was ever going to listen to their story, that they wouldn't have a voice to that. And that we could inspire them not only to share their stories of the past, but to inspire them to create a story for their future that they'd be really, really excited about.
I love that.
And so what we do in the work that we do is that we help them, they analyze the past, they really reflect on the past and then analyze how has that created my current reality, and what do I want to change for the future? And we provide them different tools at different stages and different, demographics and things to help them create a new story if that's what they're trying to do, or to change a story, or just to design a future that you're so excited about.
Yeah.
And so we kind of cover all 3 aspects, past, present, and future. And I think that's a really important part of that work. So
I love everything that you just said right there. Like just all of the concepts of this, bringing in all the different levels, all the different time frames of the life, and how they're all important, and how the story part of it is critical. I think there's so much, there's research, there's so much to support that there's power in it. But even just I love the title of your organization, because My Story Matters. Like I think that just alone, that title is very telling, right? Like it just helps us all feel it a little bit and go, oh yeah, it does. It causes you to reflect. Right. And so you can tell it was all inspired, because it's like, that's so good. It's so powerful right away. Okay. So what I would love to hear about is, so tell us a little bit more about the organization, like what kind of cool, I'd love to hear just some of the experiences you've had. Like what, I know you started, how long ago did you start? I can't remember.
12 years ago.
Okay. So yeah, so 12 years ago, like obviously it started off just with what were you doing at that point, and kind of tell us some of the big milestones that have happened with the organization.
Yeah, so in the beginning, we started with what we called our Fighter series, and we would interview children who were battling cancer. And we were specifically working with kids who were had terminal cancer. That was where we started. And so we were helping them document their journey to this point and what they wanted to leave as a legacy behind, right? And so we started sitting down with those families. That's kind of where we started. And then we added an angel series. So we sit down with parents who have lost a child and we help them document that child's story so that it's preserved for generations to come and can be shared. And then we expanded. We called it our champion series. We found that there were lots of places where people were really having to step into their champion story. They had been in what we call the war story section of their life. Like something had really affected them, whether that was homelessness or with refugees, or I mean, just so many different populations where they'd come through something very difficult. And so we would come with them and help them kind of do what we just said, reflect on what had brought them to this point, and then help them just design a future that they're so excited about. And that kind of morphed, and we got a grant to do 1,000 refugee stories in Salt Lake City.
Oh, wow.
And we were like, how are we going to get to that many kids? And how are we going to do that, right? And we had to go through the school system to find the interpreters and to kind of make all that work. And as we were doing that, the feedback that came back was, we need this for every kid in the class. Like, you're changing these kids. What's happening? We were simply giving them a voice and a common shared experience. I think that's the other like benefit of that. And so we created a curriculum for schools so teachers can teach this, and kids can write their own stories and publish them as part of the class that they take now.
And so is that accessible just like on your website? Like, how do you get that curriculum?
Yeah, so you can go to myherojourney.com, and that's where you can get like a teacher can sign up and get a classroom for or curriculum for their classroom. We do have a home edition version. So homeedition.myherojourney.com, and you can do it with your kids at home. And the curriculum itself teaches you the science and how your brain works and how you like create a story you're excited about and how you frame the things that you want to say. It's not about telling the family history side of your story and what we're doing, but we're helping you create the story you want for your life, to be the hero of your story. So we love that. And most recently, we've developed a brand new curriculum called Safe Harbors that we are taking into the incarcerated space. So we're in the jails and the prisons, teaching those people how to create a story for a second chance, and just empower them that they are capable of whatever change is needed, and that they can have whatever they want to create in their future. And so we're helping empower them in that setting. So
oh my gosh.
Been in a lot of different spaces.
So much. I just recently had someone that I like love dearly have some incident that he's now ended up incarcerated. And I love hearing that, because I think I've never been able to relate to how hard that would be until now, because I've never had someone close to me that was going through it. And now that I do, I'm so much more like conscious of how difficult that would be and how that could like really rob you of thinking that you had a lot of life. You could see how that could really take away your long-term, like what your plans were. Right. So I can see how, what was it called again? The program for that?
Safe Harbors.
Safe Harbor. I can see how that could like totally change someone's life, because going in could be so devastating that if they could have something to help them kind of rewrite or write their future story, right? Like what you're saying, then.
Well, yeah, the system is set up, and really society we label, we put these in it, like, you're a thief, you're an addict, you're a label, right? And that's what they're known as. They're given a number, their name's not even used anymore, right? And so we begin that journey with them of, who are you? And they can rattle off those labels. They write them down, and I can say to them, wait a second, so you're a thief, right? You're a thief. And they'll say, yeah, I am. And I'll say, okay, did you ever go to the grocery store and pay for groceries? And they'll say, yes, I did.
Yeah.
I'll say, well, did you ever go to the gas station, put gas in your car and pay for it? Well, of course. And I said, so you're not a thief, because a thief would do it at all times and in all places. That is not a thief. You are actually someone who stole a lot of things, maybe a lot of things, but stole some things, but that is not who you are. And so we help them like separate that, which is brand new for them. They're like, what? You don't believe that I am all those things? And I'm like, absolutely not.
No.
You know, no. So
That
who are
is
you? And I think we do this. I mean, we can broaden this in our own families. Like, think of the way in which we label communities or people, and we're like, oh, I want to hear this story about you, because maybe there's something that's like triggered us, but we forget that there's a whole lot more to that person than maybe that one little hard story in there too, right? And so when I sit down with people in the homeless shelters, or you know, in a refugee camp somewhere, you know, I am actually not there to hear the refugee story or to hear their homeless story. I am there to figure out who they are, what makes them tick, how they've built their resiliency, and then what it is they still want out of this life, right? And so we don't focus in on just that story when we're there, because we're there to inspire hope. I mean, our purpose is a little bit different than maybe the family history story we're going to tell, and yet it has a place in all of those stories, I think.
Super important. And I think even just defining that, then like that will, even if that person does pass away and their posterity gets that story, how powerful is it for them to see who that person wanted to be and who they were striving to be, like as they you know, got to the end of their incarceration, or even as they were in there, that the changes and the person, it helps them see the person that's in there, you know, the person in their family line, or the person that they know and love, right? It just helps them get to know that real person. I love that so much. So I feel like we're touching on so many things, but I don't want to forget to ask this question. So I'm just curious, if someone wanted to help with your project, is there a way for people to volunteer and help, like with those different parts of your organization?
If you go to mystorymatters.org, there's a volunteer page, and you can put in your interest to volunteer. And as we grow, there's lots of different ways to get involved. COVID kind of changed all of our volunteer opportunities for a while. We're hoping a lot of them come back, but there's room for lots. We need lots of help in lots of areas.
Well, I love that. I think that's fantastic. We'll throw that definitely in the comments of the video, and make sure that people know about it, because I think that's really cool. And I could see that being really powerful. I think a little intimidating and a little scary at first. So like, I kind of would love to hear how you go about that. Like, is there, like, are you intimidated when you first go to someone that's, you know, either incarcerated or has like a hard life, and you're like going to start trying to help them tell a story that's maybe hard? Like, is that difficult for you? What's your process? Help us, because I'm sure some of us have that in our families or in our neighborhoods, or just in the general people that we want to interview. I'm sure some of us have those like concerns. So help us know kind of what your process is, and how you work through that.
Well, I think for me, like, that uncomfortable, just, you know, it comes from a source of fear, right? It's the fear of the unknown, because we may not know what to say. We feel like we're inadequate. We feel like we don't have enough. And what I have learned in all of these spaces is you are enough. And I think what we have to be more courageous to do is to just walk across the street and say, I know you're having a hard time. I don't know what to do or what to say, but I want you to know that I see you. And if you want to talk about something, or if there's something I could do, I am totally here. And just know, like, I don't have all the answers and I don't know everything, but I care. Right. And I think if we were better at that, the ice would be broken. They'll let us know how to serve them and how to show up for them. Right. And we don't have to have all the answers, and we don't have to get it right. But if we can get curious, that's what I tell people. Get curious. Just come and say, like, I see you. I know this is a really difficult time. What is it like for you right now? What things are helpful? What things are hurtful? You know, like, what do you need? And just ask questions. Just go to listen and to learn. When we first were writing the Safe Harbors curriculum, I interviewed 1,000 inmates and their families and just listened to just gather information of where are the pain points, what's the struggles, what do you need, right? And I think, people are like, oh my gosh, are you so scared to like go teach in the prison, you know? And no, I'm not, because like the first day it was like, oh, I don't know how this works, and I got to figure all that out, right? But I get a beautiful job inside there, right? Like, I get to sit down with them and empower them to believe in themselves. Like, It's a fantastic experience. I could do it all day long, every day. And my kids will tell you, like, we hope she comes home. That's what she told one neighbor. My daughter told one of the neighbors, she loves it so much. We hope she comes home. Like, I could go there all day because their stories will bring you to the knees. You know what I mean? Like, we create these stories in our head of
Right.
what we think who do we think they are and what they've done and how horrible they might be, right? To protect ourselves. That's kind of like our go-to.
Yeah,
but the reality is, I mean, I've met thousands now, and they didn't have an upbringing that I had. They didn't get taught things that I was taught. And really of them, they were thrown in some really awful circumstances very early. And it's difficult to climb out, but it's not impossible. And that's what we love to tell them. Like, you can make any change you want, right? And so I think no matter what the circumstances, you might have a family member you really want to interview, and you're like, oh, I don't know. Like, they don't like to talk about their story. And here's everybody's first. Well, there's nothing important about me. Like, I didn't do anything. Really, there's like nothing. I didn't do anything. I mean, that is everybody's go-to, right?
Yes.
And if you're like, oh, I'm sure that's not true, will you just answer a few questions for me, right?
Right.
And get them to like break the ice and come up with some easy questions. Like, so where'd you grow up? What's your family look like? Right? Like, what were some of your favorite childhood memories, right? And just get them like talking about things that are very comfortable, very easy. Don't jump in and be like, so tell me all about the war, Grandpa. Like, he's probably not going to talk to you at that point, right? But if you could say things, instead of asking for the details of the trauma or the details of the hard, ask them for the lessons. What did you learn about resiliency by serving in the war? What did you learn about leadership by serving in the war? What did you learn about humility by serving in the war, right? Then they'll naturally tell you how they grew and how they've become. And some of the details may happen and some of them won't. But really what you want to pass on anyway are those like character building, faith promoting stories of like, my grandpa was resilient and courageous. And I'm using one example here, right? But I think that's what you really want anyway. We don't need to know how many miles you walked and how hard it really was. And you know what I mean? And if they want to share, fine.
Great. Yeah.
And I think sometimes when we start these stories, these difficult stories off, we think that that's the easier thing to share. So we start asking little specifics, right? But that actually brings them right back into those scenarios and kind of like opens up those emotions when you can say, no, looking way down the road.
Yeah.
How did that experience shape you?
Yeah.
Right. Because we say all the time in the work that we do, we tell people your war stories consume you, but when you choose to give voice to your champion story, it transforms you.
Say that again. When you choose to give voice to your champion story,
it transforms you.
Ah.
Right. And so if we stay in the stories of hard, this is, and we latch on to this is a part of who we are, it consumes us and we don't have the ability to transform out of it. But our champion stories can reach back to those stories of the past only to reference us to who we've now become because of them, not in spite of them. Right.
Right.
And so if we can celebrate who they've become because of what they've done, not in spite of what they are, then they find hope and courage and they'll find the courage to share. Right. And so that's been the thing that I've learned. I don't know, I'm rambling here, but that's one of the things I've learned, like in this process, right?
I just keep thinking like,
we want the champion story. That's what we want. Right? Like that's what we want to say, because we all, at the end of the day, we're all our own hero in our story. We all have a hero or villain. And so we can have this horrible honorary story that we're going to pass on. Or we can say, you know what, I've done some hard things and I don't want to talk about those hard things. And maybe they do, but most won't.
Yeah.
This is what I learned from the hard things.
This is
right. And this is how it shaped me. Like that is so much easier for people to share than, So tell me all the cities you went to. Tell me, you know what I mean?
Well, what I love about all of this is like, I kind of told you this before. Amy and I we're friends from long ago. And I was telling her a little bit about our project. She was telling me about hers. And the point I made was we love talking about the mental health benefits, like the psychological benefits of these connections. And so I love what you're drawing out right now is like there are these deeper healing and even just like rewriting what we believe in ourselves, because I have a friend that just recently got diagnosed with a mental illness, which was like a no big deal thing. Just like, okay, cool. Now we can roll with it. And it gives you what you're doing, but she was almost immediately devastated. And so as you're talking about this person, it's like, no, like now I just take what I have and I learn from it and I write my future story and I say, okay, this is how I'm going to move forward. Right. And so just, I feel like everything you're saying is great and wonderful for people who have like a really hard background that they're trying to move away from. But what about like also for all of those of us who struggle with any form of anxiety, depression, ADHD, whatever that mental struggle is, or physical, really, right? Because anything that's like becoming defining us, right? Like you're saying, I just think that's so powerful. Everything you've said is powerful. So you can ramble, or whatever the word was you chose, all day long if you want, because I think it's great.
Well, that's one of the things as we've really started to work like inside this incarcerated space. I actually told somebody the other day, no matter what we're dealing with, we're in a prison. Like that's what I'm learning, right? Like whether addiction is our prison, whether anxiety is our prison, whether depression is our prison, whether loneliness is our prison, like you name it. Really, we're incarcerating ourselves. That's what I'm learning. Like this material is so applicable to everyone, everywhere, because we all have something in which we have allowed ourselves to be trapped by. Every one of us.
No, that is so true.
So it's the same tools to rewrite that story.
Yeah. Wow, I love that so much. I'm like, I want to take notes so I can come back and rethink through this, because it's like I want to chew on it longer, That's so good. And I have been, sorry if it looks like I'm typing, it's because I keep putting comments so people can see it, because I think this is so powerful. So I feel like we've kind of covered it, but let's ask this question directly. So why do you feel like we should all tell our stories? And why do you feel like we should tell our hard stories? Like what do you think would be at the core of that?
Brene Brown says that when we deny our stories, they own us. And when we give voice to them, we have the power to write a brave new ending. And I think that sums it up. Like we can literally be trapped by our story. And so I think there's a healing power for us that certainly happens when we choose to give voice to our story. But there is something that happens for the community in which you choose to share. Like we learn from one another. We are hardwired for connection. Right. And so I can sit and read a book all day long about a principle or an action or something. But if I sit down with someone who's lived it and who's, and I can witness it in action, and I can hear like, oh, I can see you now thriving and successful. And you're telling me 5 years ago you couldn't get out of bed. That is so much more empowering and inspiring to me than just like reading something here or there, or trying to read a principle of personal development, right? Like show me how it works, right? I want proof in the pudding, right? And so there's something that happened. And that was really the magic of what would happen when we would go in and we would teach this curriculum, like into a classroom in the schools. The teachers would be like, you were here for like 6 hours. The playground changed, the lunchroom changed, the classroom, like, what did you do? Mm-hmm. And I would say, well, you know what? We created a shared experience in the process of story. They all answered the same 54 questions today. And they know that they all answered the same 54 questions. Mm-hmm. So they could go out on the playground and say, what did you say when they asked you this? And then they could answer and they could be like, oh my gosh, I had no idea that your parents were divorced too. Oh, I had no idea that you liked ice cream. Why did you never tell me, like, whatever it was? Right. And I think at the end of the day, the power of story is that we realize we are all so much more alike than we are different. And I haven't met anybody yet that I cannot relate to in some fashion and in some way. And a lot of us want the same outcomes for things. A lot of us have the same dreams, the same hopes. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're, we've interviewed kids from probably 30, 40 countries at this point, right? Right. They like pizza. They like ice cream. You know what I mean? Like they love to watch movies. You know what I mean? And they all want to be successful and succeed and have an impact in this world, right? And it looks a little bit different, but the bottom line, we have the same common emotions, right? Yeah. And I think it's a way to unite people. And in this great work that you guys are doing, it's a way to unite generations, right?
Yeah.
That is so powerful.
So
right?
powerful.
So powerful to be able to link that in there. And you cannot share your story and not have it impact, I believe, both sides of that generational chain.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and even as you were talking, I thought of a mental health nugget that because we do mental health nuggets once a month with a therapist, and she's wonderful. And one of hers was talking about, because I said to her, well, but what about those stories you just don't want to tell because it almost hurts too much to talk about them? So obviously, like we can all relate to, like, we have something hard in our life. For me, it's like when I went through cancer, I quit journaling. I just, like, at the beginning I was doing it, and then at one point I just quit and I never started again. Like, and so I said that to her thinking I was just having an engaging question, but she said something to me. I'm trying to remember exactly how she worded it, but it was essentially like, that's a sign that you need to write about it because you are probably, and so when you just said you can write your own ending or however you worded that. For me, it's like this reminder because I still haven't done it. And so I'm like, right now I'm thinking like, Olivia, that's what you need to do. You need to get in there. You need to write it and define your own ending. Exactly. Like I can choose it if I quit trying to hide it and like not deal with the feelings that get surfaced every time, like when I think about it, which is exactly how I feel. And I'm sure people can relate to that, but
It reminds me of, I sat down with a father at the homeless shelter. This has been a while, 5, 6, 7 years ago. And we were there to do all the children in the homeless shelter that day. We were there to photograph them and to gather their stories and publish them. And there was these 3 little kids that wanted to go so badly. I mean, like 6, 10. And I would guess there was a teenager in there, maybe 14, 15. And they wanted to go so bad. All the other kids are lining up, right? And he wouldn't sign the release form. He wouldn't let him come do it. And so I said, will you just go for a walk with me? And he was like, sure. And so we went for a walk and I just said, what's stopping you from letting your children share their story? And he just sat there for a while. He didn't really want to talk. And I said, listen, I'm not going to force you to do anything. I'm just curious. I need to understand. And he said, I don't want my children to ever remember this chapter of our story. Mm. And I said, why is that so painful? And he shared, he's just like, I am struggling to hold a job. I don't want my kids to ever remember that dad couldn't provide for them because I've always been able to provide for them. Mm. And I said, what if this chapter of their story helps them look back and see resiliency? What if this chapter of their story provides empathy for a group of people in the future that they wouldn't have maybe otherwise come in contact with, right? Yeah. What if this could be one of their strongest chapters where their courage is built, right? Mm-hmm. Where their grit is found, right? Mm-hmm. And he just said, yeah, but I placed him here. And they were like, please, dad, please, dad, please, dad. And at the end of the day, he chose not to let them participate, which was so hard for like my mom heart. Those kids wanted to so badly, right? And we just had a conversation about how, especially in our hard times, what we can leave behind in those raw moments can be inspiring. If all we ever do is document the happy and the joy, then people can't find themselves in our story because there's no one who has only happy and joy, right? Yeah. And so we actually become very connected to the stories in which we can find ourselves. And since we all struggle, and since we all go through hardship, and since we all have days where it's too much and it's too hard and I don't know and it's unknown, I think we become connected to those stories where it's like, I was there and you're raw about it. And that vulnerability allows you in because you're like, oh, someone who I can relate to right now. Right. Yeah. And so it's so much nicer to tie the pretty bow and talk about everything that's working great and that we love. Right. Right. And I think actually the most powerful stories we can leave. And it's not about the details and the gritty, right? But it's about the real and the raw of what that, valley of our life looked like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to know, is there any like specific stories? You've shared one that's really powerful. Are there any others that you would like, oh, I want to share that story because it was so powerful. Such a good example of like the power that stories can bring into someone's life or into your life as you've interviewed or talked with. Do you know what I mean? I didn't really give you a fair warning on this, so I'm kind of rambling to let you think. And if you don't have one, it's totally fine. But I just thought you might have one that you're like, oh, I should share that story, but it hasn't opened up, right? Or are there any that come to mind?
Oh man.
Or are there too many?
We've published almost 5,000 at this point.
Wow.
And there's so many gems. Maybe let me see. Let me think. I got a couple that are just coming to mind. So one, we sat down with a family who had lost a child, and they were trying to tell the story, and it took them years to work with us. And when we finally published the story, she came and visited me a couple weeks after that, and she said, I wish I would have known what this would do in the end. I would have done it so much faster. And I said, why is that? And she said, I felt like if I told the story and we hit publish, that my child's life would be over. And I was trying to keep it alive. She said, what I didn't realize is by telling it and publishing it, she's alive forever.
Right.
She's like, I take this book in my purse in the grocery store, and I'm showing people, like, look at my daughter, and I'm telling people at the park, and I'm telling people everywhere. And I didn't have those conversations before because it was like only in my heart. And now I have something to share the story with. And so the lesson I learned from that conversation that I try to share with people is, don't wait to tell the story. It's not that you're putting a final period on this forever, right? Like, it actually allows you to keep telling the next chapter and to write the next piece, right? And so if you've got someone that you've lost that you're like, I really should write their story, do it today, because really it allows it to be shared and it allows it to grow. And I've learned that from so many families who have watched that brave story with us. I also think it's a way to heal and transform. One of the stories, and this might be unrelated, but it was one of the most impactful story moments for me in this process. I was sitting down with a young lady who had just come here from Syria, in the refugee family. They'd only been in America a week. So, and they were in Salt Lake, and her dad was a little leery of us interviewing his daughter, right? So he was attending the interview, and we were going through it. And one of the questions that was posed was, who would you want to meet someday, and why? And I happened to walk by the interviewers at that moment, and I was like, oh, I want to hear her answer, so I paused for a second, and she said, Jesus Christ. And I will never, ever forget the look in the father's face. It was sheer terror, a look I have never seen in my life, ever. And he grabbed her arms, and she panicked, and they just stood there, and like just this sheer terror. And my beautiful interviewer just felt prompted to say, that is beautiful, and that is safe here. And they just wept, because he was a leading surgeon in Syria. And because they had professed Christianity and believed in Christ, they were going to be murdered, right? And they ran for their life because of that.
Danger, yeah.
And so for her to give voice to her deepest desire in a new country, in a new place, right, and to feel safe, I think they've spoken to me several times since that, like, that moment was the moment they felt safe for the first time in their whole life, right, to have a voice to something like that. And so I know it has the power to heal and have courage. And
well, and can I add to like what you just said, those of us who have the ability, because we live in a place where it's safe and okay for us to tell our story, like, we should like embrace and love and acknowledge the fact that, hey, I have not only the rights and the ability to, but like, I can do this without any risk of, you know what I mean? So I like, that story is so cool, because it's a reminder how blessed we are to like be able to tell our stories. What a blessing and opportunity that is, so just taking advantage of the fact that we can.
Oh, for sure. There are so many cultures where that's not okay.
Yeah.
Right. They don't want it documented. They can't share that. Right. Yeah. And we don't. We totally take it for granted here. So I think, and I don't know, I could share 1,000 stories, but I think just the ability it really helps people when they're in the place of trauma to stabilize and kind of ground themselves with, okay, what's the reality? What is the real story here, right? And what is it I would change if I want to? And what can I do about taking that step for change? And for someone else to acknowledge their story physiologically changes them. I want to read a quote. I don't know how much time we have, but I really want to.
Yeah, you're great. That's so cool. I like, as you're looking for the quote, say that again. to tell the story, it physiologically changes them?
Physiology changes. So I've got this quote from Lisa Randon. She's a doctor, and she published this awesome article in Psychology Today that talks about the impact that storytelling has on the human body. And so she says this: because telling your story while being witnessed by loving attention of others who care may be the most powerful medicine on earth. Each of us is constantly unfolding a narrative, a hero in a novel that nobody else will write. And yet so many of us leave our stories untold and our songs unsung. And when this happens, we wind up feeling lonely, listless, out of touch with our life's purpose, and plagued with a chronic sense that something is out of alignment. We may even wind up feeling unworthy, unlived, or sick. So think about all the times in your life that you felt lonely, listless, out of touch with your purpose, plagued with a constant sense of out of alignment. You felt unworthy, unloved, or unsick. And the science of this whole big article was talking about how, if that's true, you've probably not given voice to your story. You're probably holding it in, right? And she says, every time you tell your story and someone else who cares bears witness to it, so someone else is willing to listen, you turn off the body's stress response. It flips off toxic stress hormones like cortisol and epinephrine, and it flips on relaxation response with healing hormones like oxytocin, dopamine, nitric acid, and endorphins. Not only does it turn off the body's innate self-repair mechanism, it functions as a preventative mechanism or treatment when you're sick. It relaxes your nervous system. It heals your mind of depression, anxiety, fear, anger, and feelings of disconnection. When you choose to connect and share your story, you literally heal.
Wow. That is so cool.
Isn't that like, there's like physiological benefits of this work, right?
Oh my God.
And so who do you know that is sick or lonely or feeling unworthy or any of that? Like, we saw this through COVID, right? Like when we isolated people, we saw how it affected their health, literally, right? And so who needs to connect?
Yeah.
Who needs to have a chance to remind themselves of their story, to give voice to that story, to feel seen, because there's nothing worse than feeling like nobody cares. Nobody knows I'm here. Nobody knows what I've done. Right.
It's true. It's true. Oh, and I love like bringing it full circle to like when you made the comment that you quickly discover that we are all way more in common, way more alike than we are not alike. Right.
Mm-hmm.
I'm botching it, but what you said was way better. But the point is, we are so much alike, and that is at our core, all of us just wanting to be loved and accepted, and through that storytelling, we can do that. But we can also, through asking and obtaining those stories, we can provide that healing for them, which is so cool, because I think that's like a gift we can give to our loved ones, our neighbors, our friends, whoever it is that needs to tell a story. So I love this, because this month we're focusing on interviewing, and it's like perfect timing we're going into the holidays. Like, what a perfect time to like take advantage of these interactions with family and even just get them telling and writing their own story. What did you call it? I'm sorry that I can't keep the name in my head, but making their own hero story kind of thing.
Yeah, I think, And I think here's the thing. What if you tried this at the Thanksgiving table, right? Instead of or when you're getting with a group of people, how many times we're like, introduce yourself and tell us one thing about yourself, right? Yeah. And everyone's like, one thing, what do I say? And everyone's like, I like M&Ms or whatever, right? What if you would lead with what I call the champion story questions of like, tell us about a time in your life that you learned resiliency, or that you found grit, or that you learned hard work, or like something that would make them draw a story.
Yes.
Right? Like they can't just be like, oh, well, in my childhood, right? Like be specific, right? Like what if think of when I shift that question, it changes the room, right? Because people have to come up with something. A dear friend of mine taught me, I never ask him, so how are you today? I never say that, because a friend of mine taught me a phrase that is so powerful. When I meet somebody, I'm like, hi, how's your heart today? Because you can't just say, oh, fine, when I'm asking about your heart, right? And I think that's what we're trying to do, is get to that soul level, and not from a place that makes you unsafe, right? But that helps you relate. Like, I truly care. Like, I don't want to just know that I'm fine. That's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for, how is your heart? Yeah. Is it heavy? Is it burdened? Is it Is it happy? Is it joyful? Like, what is your heart feeling today? Right. And it allows you to shift that a little bit. And we can always find a way to relate. I mean, even when I go into the prison, I tell them, like, my story is not a journey of addiction. My story has never landed me behind these bars. However, I do know loneliness. I do know despair. I do know disappointment. I do know discouragement. And I own the emotions that I have learned those lessons in other ways, in other hard times. And so what is it you're feeling today? And let me tell you about a time where I felt that way. And this is how I changed the situation for me. And what do you want to do to change it for you? Right. And so if you can find, like, you know, maybe it's even a question around the table of, like, when's a time that you felt ungrateful? And then what a time you felt grateful, like a high and a low. Like, maybe that's what you start with, right?
I love that.
Because let's all be real, we've all had those moments too, right? And so instead of, you know, we can claim what we want and give voice to what it is we're going to create, which is the gratitude. But we also can give voice to the fact that I'm not always in that space, and I have to reach for it and use the tool to remain there.
Love it. Yes. So powerful. I want to talk to you all day. I feel like I could, because I'm like, okay, what other, you know, I have so many things, but two things I do want to ask is, one, would you be willing to share with us where you got that quote from that research that you did? So we can put it, is that something online that we can share with, you don't have to share it right now, but we can add it to the comments of the video and all that.
I'll put it in the comments right now.
Perfect. Because I think that would be really fun for some people to read, because we've got some people who are more research focused, right? And then the other question is, do you have a list on your website of different things, or is there somewhere that we could go to ask those, say I'm going to champion story questions, like where we could get ideas of those?
I should put together something, right?
Good. Yes.
I don't. We've got them all tucked throughout our curriculum, and I've never done like a summary story map with that. But I think just look at the outcomes that you are hoping and dreaming for. So if you're like, I want to feel secure, or I want to feel compassionate, or I want, like, what is your vision of what you're aiming to become? And then ask questions that get you there. Right. So if you want to be resilient, then what kinds of things would bring resiliency, and ask questions about becoming resilient. Right. And so I think we're most curious about the things that we ourselves have a vision of wanting to acquire. Right. Like, oh, I want to be known for hard work, you know, or I want to be known to be compassionate, and I'm not there yet. Or, you know, I want to be patient, and I'm not patiently waiting to be right now, right? So it's like, what areas in your life have you learned about patience, right? Like, I think if you look to the outcome and backtrack, you'll find the right question.
I like that. Look to the outcome and backtrack. I'm typing that one too. See, you've just got so many good nuggets. I'm just going to have like a whole list of quotes from Amy.
You're so good.
And then when you do make that list of questions someday, I know you're telling me I can do it. When you do make that, you let me know, because I want that.
That's a great idea. I'm going to take a note of that too.
Yes. Are there any last, because I've already taken so much of your time, are there any last minute like thoughts or I don't know, any last minute comments that you'd love to like just say to the audience about any of this, that just in summary?
Well, I wanted to just, my last little plug here is to make sure that you're taking time to tell your story. It's super powerful to interview other people, and that's important work. Don't forget to leave your story behind, and to leave your stories of overcoming those things, right? And to leave your stories in the mix, because I don't know, I would imagine there's a lot of parents on this, and you know, it's easy to like get the kids scrapbook done. It's easy to get like tell their story, all the important things for them. And I have found my kids, I've made it very intentional part of this process for myself to tell my own story in the journey. And my kids love reading my stories and the different chapters that I've written, and the good and the bad. I grabbed this last minute because I thought, I'm going to show it. So we had struggles with infertility early on. And so all of our children are here via in vitro, and it was a big journey, and it was really, really hard. And there was a lot of heartache in there. Right. And so I had the inspiration to start a storybook of that whole journey, because I figured someday my kids won't appreciate that for a really long time, probably. But I created this book called, Expecting You. And it's everything. It's all the journal entries. It's the miscarriages. It's the failed attempts. It's the heartache and the and you're here, moments. And it's all of, it's that little chapter of our journey that was so hard. And my kids, even though I have teenagers now, and I didn't think they would actually appreciate it at this phase yet. I thought maybe someday when they're in the motherhood phase, they might, years down the road, they read these stories and they'll come to me, Mom, you worked so hard to get me here. Mm-hmm. Mom, I can't believe you fought for this, right? And they actually appreciate it much earlier in life than I thought they would. And there's other little chapters of my story that I've done that they have come back to me and been like, it's so nice to know that you struggled here too, right? Yeah. And I think we all kind of link into that. So that's my challenge is it's really easy to wrap up all of our efforts into telling the stories of the past or to the generation that's about to pass, and all of that is good. And and there's time and seasons, right? Mm-hmm. Don't forget to do your own.
Yeah. Do you have a recommended approach?
Pick one thing and do it. Done is better than perfect. That's my motto. We can spend all day trying to make it perfect, right? And just tell them, have the courage to do the first one. And then I do a family story every year. I tell a family yearbook every year to tell the family story of the year. And I tuck a lot of my stuff inside that too. But when there are those chapters like this infertility chapter, or I have had a lot of medical stuff, so those journeys, I tell them individually, but just start.
Just do it.
Start. Pick one. Pick what you've done in the last year. Pick your 20. I mean, this is here's a great milestone. What is your COVID pandemic story? Have you documented yours? We're writing history right now.
Sure. It's true. I don't know what my hang up is, but I think I was supposed to do this interview with you today because it has motivated me. I'm like, I've got to do it. I've got to do it. I've been avoiding it for too long. So I'm going to do it, Amy. I'm committing to you.
Hey, I'm excited to read it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to bring you back at some point because I just think we could talk for hours and hours, but thank you. Thank you so much.
Story is my passion and I could talk for days. So.
Yeah, I know. I feel like that's where we met. We had a shared love of stories. And so it's so cool to see everything you've been able to do with your whole mission of life, I feel like, and that is so cool. So I'm excited to follow you. I want to come look and see how I can volunteer. And I hope other people will also, after watching this, have the passion to come and help too. So thank you for your time.
But at the end of the day, I just hope every single person listening, I hope you'll look in the mirror tonight and say, my story matters. At the end of the day, that's what matters.
I love it. Thank you so much.